Welcome to Unlearn the Crap TV with your host, Kathy Baldwin. Unlearn the Crap TV is more than just a show. It's a movement towards breaking free from the disempowering structures designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. It's about education, healing, and unlearning the detrimental beliefs that have been ingrained in society for generations. So now, please welcome the host of Unlearn the Crap TV, Kathy Baldwin.
Welcome to another episode of Unlearn the Crap and Level Up Your Soul is Calling. I'm your host, Kathy Baldwin. As you know, crap, as the way I define it, is the neuroprogramming of our brain, our thoughts, our feelings. It is the conditioned responses and automatic programming that we either are born with, raised in, societally, in our family. It can come through ancestral DNA. There's so many ways that we can have these conditioned responses and automatic programming that will take us out of our disempowerment. But conditioned responses and automatic programming is just one aspect of it, because we are energy and we are physical. And so the physical manifestation of those of that crap will affect our gut microbiome. It'll affect our disease, our central nervous system. It will affect our stress, our health, which affects every aspect of our life, including our work, our wealth, our relationships, and our quality of life. Today, I have an amazing guest that I cannot wait to get into our conversation with. I don't know where our conversation is going to lead with Dr. Brad, because when him and I first met, I think we touched on about 20 different topics and we were just getting to know each other. Welcome, Dr. Brad. How are you today?
Well, thanks for inviting me. I think this is going to be fun, and I'm excited to see where this is going. I don't think either one of us have a huge plan, and that's good.
Yes, we're going to let the universe and our conversation and our soul guide us. So let's start with, what crap did you need to unlearn so that you could level up?
Boy, you name it. I grew up in an extremely dysfunctional household, so we had no relative anything on which to view life, relate, or anything else. And it was, all that had to have been unlearned. I was about 11 years old when I looked at my neighborhood and go, I'm not going to live this way. There's a keep up with the Joneses issue on the West Coast and San Francisco Bay Area, East Bay Area. I just go, I'm not going to live this way. And I think I was 11 years old when I quit watching TV. I just bowed out. It was a waste of time. Having their TV in a home I've lived in over 45 years. And it started for me as a young child, and it's never quit. Every time you run into something that is a profound thought, a profound truth, a profound belief, it always confronts something else. And that's just my way of life.
Okay, I want to come back to that exact point. But first, before we go any further, could you please tell our audience who you are and how you serve the world now that you've unlearned your crap and you are leveling up?
Okay, I'm one of those rare people that have so many hats, it sounds impossible and ridiculous. I've made a living for the past 4 decades being a functional medicine doctor. I've done ministry all over the world. It's pretty much the kingdom of God that drives everything that I do. And we do things in a very, very functional way. So as a veteran functional medicine doctor, it's common for people to talk about dealing with root issues, but they have no tools to deal with them. We deal with all aspects of chronic illness, the most debilitating, dysfunctional, the things that no one can ever resolve at all. Most people come to us, have been to a multitude of other doctors, some of the best specialists in the world. They get no help there, and we get them well again. So that's chronic Lyme disease, uh, gut issues, hormone dysregulation, autoimmune issues, a whole gamut of chronic health issues we can resolve with people in a fraction of the time that they've experienced almost anywhere else, simply because of unlearning all of this stuff that we're going to talk about and having to figure things out on our own. I'm a principle-based thinker, and I'm very mechanical I'm a complex thinker, but I'm very mechanical in the way that I view things. And I'm the only one of, I can't even fill the fingers in one hand of the doctors I know that have studied physiology their entire lifespan. Everybody quits on graduation. And it's one of those things. This is one of the things you got to unlearn. If you don't understand what's going on, if you can't explain the mechanics, there's no way you can help somebody.
I love that. And I'm going to do my very best to keep us on this track, even though from our previous conversation, I know we can divert into a million different areas. But for me, unlearning the crap became about taking the concepts that were out there and really understanding the mechanics, the connection between the energy and the physical, the cause, the effect, how all of this works, so that I didn't need to have pills and platitudes in order to deal with whatever the ramifications were manifesting in my body. You said something when we first met that I want to start this conversation off with. You defined what the term doctor means. Could you explain that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I ran into this a long time ago doing biblical studies, looking at dictionaries, and you go, that doesn't really make any sense. And so we went back to the first English dictionary with Noah Webster's 1827 dictionary, and you start defining things. And then I've been to antique stores and all that, and you look at progressive dictionaries, and there's these wordsmiths that change the direction of culture by changing the meaning of words.
Yeah.
So the original meaning of doctor is teacher. And you think about that one. People today, we had a guest speaker come into a conference, was a head administrator in a research hospital, tied in, one of the big ones. I don't remember which one. But he started talking about a typical medical doctor visit, and this was decades ago. 6 minutes. They pull your chart out of the door. They start flipping through the chart. Within 6 seconds, they're defining their diagnosis. Within about 30, they have a diagnosis. They are formulating what their treatment plan is, and they haven't even seen the face. They open the door, and all the time that they spend with whoever's there is just fluff, because they already have their idea and what they're going to do. And you think about that, you cannot dialogue with a doctor in almost any profession. Insurance has destroyed that. People aren't paid for their time. They're paid for their diagnostic issue. And that's part of the big reason why people can't get any health, because there's no interaction. If I talk about that interaction as a story, history makes a story, and it's the story of someone's history that brings them to the place where they are presenting in front of you. And if you don't have time to look at that story, you have no idea what you're working with, because the story has all the keys on how to unwind all these lifestyle issues that brought them to that place. And if you don't look at it, you can't help them. And that is part of the teaching. Is I remember a lecture from an 80-year-old doctor who said, if you want to take the best history, this is what you do. You pull up a chair, you sit down eye level with whoever you're going to interact with, and you ask them this question: what do you think is going on? And then shut up and listen, because 75% of the time they're right.
That is so amazing to hear a doctor say it from that perspective, because I remember in school learning about how you do a scientific theory. You come up with an assumption or a basis, and then you're out to prove it correct. What you just described is that a doctor is coming in with a preconceived notion of what the issue is, and now the brain is looking for proof that it's right. We know that our brain has a bias to always be right, and it will contort our perspective in order to be right. So if a doctor comes into a situation with a preconceived notion, I know before, when I was dealing with fibromyalgia and nobody knew what it was, the doctor was telling me I'm depressed. I'm not depressed. But he was so sure, so he just gave me antidepressants. And it cut off the root cause. How do we, as patients, take control of that situation and create a dialogue?
It's really, really simple. It's the insurance companies that destroyed that interaction. And any access to a doctor through insurance is going to make it so they can't do anything, because they're paid on conditions, not on time. And for that reason, that's why the 6-minute visits, it's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. So you have to go outside of the system to find doctors that can actually do something. And if you can't dialogue with them, you're in the wrong place, because they're not going to be able to help you. So we've just narrowed things down to way less than 10% of what's out there. If a waiting room is full and a doctor's late for his appointments, you found one that's good. Because when you come into their room, the clock's out the window and they're all yours for the time in front of them. And that's rare. That's really rare.
So instead of feeling disrespected and that the doctor is supposed to be working on time and keeping appointments and schedules, if we flipped that narrative and said, ooh, this one is taking the time that's necessary with each person, which means he's going to give me that same amount of time.
Right. People need to understand the reality of how to fire their doctors. And that is a critical issue that should be done very quickly. There's some different questions that you can do to really narrow the things down. And I've been saying this for years, and not many seem to pay much heed to it. But when you sit in front of a doctor, you get their attention and you ask them this question, this series of questions. How many people, what percentage of people you see with what condition you think I have, can you get well again? Then how long does it take you? And how much does that cost? You'll find that well over 90% of doctors cannot answer that question. I can answer it on almost any condition there is with a certain accuracy. I've been told there's no guarantees in healthcare. And I go, I have a double one. And people look
What
at
is
me
your
like, how can you do that? It's pretty simple. My first guarantee is if you come into my office, we do mostly distant care. So if we're doing evaluations or distance, the same thing. If I can't find what root issues are and how to resolve them on the first visit, I don't charge you. I don't tell you what I found. We go our separate ways. Okay. Nothing out of pocket. And people go, what? Yeah. If I can't figure out what it is and how to resolve it, there's no reason to interact. In 4 decades, no one's ever taken me up on that offer. Decade and a half, maybe 2 decades ago, I added a second one on it. When we work with somebody with a 6-month program, if at the end of 6 months we haven't made significant impact in metabolic function and infective issues, I'll continue to work for free until we do. No one's ever taken me up on that. Because you follow our instructions, you're getting well. And to collect on the second one, you got to prove that you've done what I told you to do. You just can't play games with it. But no one's ever taken me up on either one. People ask, how can you do that? And because we're that thorough, our rates of resolution are that high where I don't have to worry about it. It's not an issue.
So tell me, how did our system go from healthcare to diagnosis?
Oh,
When
really,
and
really
how did
simple.
it change?
Yeah, that happened in the early 1900s. Rockefeller and Carnegie, David Rockefeller, and I don't remember what Carnegie's first name was. They both bought huge shares into Merck and Pfizer pharmaceutical companies. And then they got together and they looked with this attitude of how can we get more people on these products so we can really reap a lot of monetary benefit. So what they did is they set up 2 colleges, the University of Chicago and Rockefeller University, looking at medical research with an medical science with a emphasis on research. And they started those colleges, then they hired 2 brothers, the Faulkner brothers, I don't remember their first names, to go out and visit all of the medical schools in North America. So all of them in America and Canada. One of those was a ex-educator, but they had an agenda, and the agenda was to dismantle the schools. The schools at that point in time were all apprentice-based. And they came up with a scathing report, the Faulkner report. They were sent out in 1905. The report came out in 1910. That report recommended that 50% of the schools close and that everybody, all the schools should have an educational system, the same thing that has been being promoted in the University of Chicago and Rockefeller University, which is a scientific basis, a classroom issue rather than interacting with people. It took all of the intuitive diagnostics out, all of the time spent with people, and put it all into the laboratory. But you said something a moment ago that I'm going to tie into this. Science is not science when you approach it with a bias. It's manipulation of fact to manipulate a group of people. And most of the science is produced in the world. If you look at the best peer-reviewed journals in the world, 40% of the articles put in the best peer-reviewed journals in the world have what's called spin on them. The results were twisted to the point where they're not supported by the research that was done. It's suspected that 75% of that happens in North America. 75% of the research that's out there. That's what doctors are basing all of their directed care on. And 75% of the time that's promoted as overt fraud. So we got 1910, the report comes out. There were 177 medical schools that were in operation when the Faulkner brothers went out. They got somebody to start Johns Hopkins University, I think his last name was Welsh. He was the director to start Johns Hopkins University with the same scientific agenda that was being promoted in the Chicago University and Rockefeller University of Chicago and Rockefeller University. They established this in Johns Hopkins within 5 years. The amount of medical schools left in North America, all of America and Canada, was 75. 100% of them had the same curriculum as Johns Hopkins University. And that's where it all started. Diagnosis is only an insurance code for a doctor to bill. It has no comprehension of causation. And it's only the diagnostic approaches, all the lab approaches are simply directed to justify the use of pharmaceuticals. It's not to find out what the cause is. It's to look at symptoms and justify the use. Yeah. Yeah, I just popped a big balloon, didn't I?
Yeah, that's scary. I mean, I have known that our system is designed to keep us controlled and manipulated. There's so many things that I talk about in my book, Unlearn the Crap, about how we became siloed and we weren't interconnected, interrelated beings that we actually are in that system. What you just talked about is keeping us trapped in these little silos and not understanding the cause and effect. You, as a functional doctor, how do we begin to know our own body and the systems? Because that is the main thing. This is one of the main things I was really excited about our conversation about, was people starting to understand and hear the intuition of their own body, understand what it's supposed to feel like when it's working properly, so that we can understand when we're out of our own alignment. And now we can start taking our health as empowerment.
Okay. I'll start this with what might seem like a skew issue, but it's not. It's really the heart of what's going on. There's a study called Epigenetics, and I was on some kind of a interactive event where they put us in a bunch of different rooms. And I got in a room with a geneticist a couple of days ago, and we had a wild talk. We had a really, really wild talk. But epigenetics, people think that their genes defines their history, their past or present, and what life's going to be like ahead of them. That's not the case. Every gene has 30,000 different potential ways it could express itself. And the way that you live determines what that is. So it's lifestyle that affects genetic expression. When you
Okay, could you really clarify that? When you say genetic expression, what do you mean in layman's terms so that we can really understand the power?
Okay, so I'll bring this into one of the big issues presently of manipulation of people with the laboratory issues. Laboratory issues are all based off of Louis Pasteur's view in his early days that all disease was created by some germ. If you could identify the germ, eradicate the germ, you eradicate disease. At the same time, he had a contemporary, Claude Bernard, who was a teacher in medical schools, who said it is a constitution, the health and the interacting of all the systems in the body that determine whether those germs can grow and create the disease. At the end of Louis Pasteur's life, Louis said, I've wasted my entire life on the wrong thing. The germ is nothing. The soil is everything. And he's referring to what Claude Bernard had been teaching. He realized that. So all these lab tests are looking for a germ, not what allows it to grow. They're looking for something, but it's never the root issue. So we take genetic testing. One of the biggest tests that's out there that people think they can use to direct their life is genetic testing, and they're looking for this MTHFR gene. It's the ability to use methylation for, and that's used for cell healing, new cell growth, for detoxification processes, hormonal issues, neurotransmitter issues. It's used for all kinds of different things. And people think if you got this MTHFR SNP, where you don't convert folate into its 5-hydroxy form, that you're destined to have a terrible life, and this will cause Downs and all these other things. That's not the case. We find people who cannot convert that all the time, and we put them on that supplement. We start healing them up, and after a period of time, they don't need it anymore because their genetic expression, we change the genetic expression with lifestyle so that it no longer expresses the negative effect, and it works as if it's not there. That's epigenetics.
So it sounds to me like each gene is its own individual person. And just like we have 360 degrees of our own perspective and how we decide to interact within our world, our thoughts, our feelings, whatever, our gene can do that as well based on the environment that it is in. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And some of the factors that affect that genetic expression: dietary lifestyle, belief systems, relational health, the fluids you take in, the way that you live, your exercise issues, your belief systems, everything that affects us affects genetic expression.
So this saying about it's just words, it doesn't matter, I can't control my own thoughts, this is part of the crap that we need to unlearn, right?
Exactly. And when you take what you are doing with realizing this neuroplasticity issue, or you change your thought issues, and you start marrying that with lifestyle issues, and you add to that the things the body needs to heal its broken systems, you convert people into the type of health that's accessible in the blue zones. Do you know anything about those?
Those are the areas where people are living over 100, correct?
Commonly. And with that, they're still working. It's common for them to live over 100. Years ago, Time Life did a study on a couple. He was like 145 and she was like 120. And they did a friend of mine told me about this. I didn't see it. A friend of mine told me, and they're not somebody that lies. Okay. And they saw a follow-up article like 20 years later, and the couple was still alive. And they knew back in Napoleon's time and some other things, and you just go, wow, that's absolutely out of people's minds. But when you look at people living in the blue zones, and the fast food market has rapidly gone in there to steal those cultures away from the young people, and they don't have the same heritage as what the older generations do. But you think about this, the sexual interactivity of couples in their 90s in the blue zones is 2 to 3 times a week. That's more than 30-year-olds are in your and my culture, simply because they're healthy enough for all those functions to stay healthy. And it blew me away years ago when somebody told me one of the biggest pools of STD passing was nursing homes. And at first I thought I was wrong, but I've talked to a lot of people and I realize that's the case. We have this sexual attraction to very, very young children playing doctor. And, what do you look like? How does that function? I don't understand that too. It never ends. It really never ends. When we're healthy, it doesn't end. But it's
there it is.
Yeah, it's these lifestyle things that we've accepted as normal in our culture that destroy those things.
Oh my goodness. So we should accept the fact that we can have healthy, happy sex life our entire lives. That we don't hit a place where that was before, it doesn't exist anymore. And if we're losing our libido, that's one of the signs, correct?
Yeah, it's really kind of fun. We work with a lot of women in their elderly ages, 70s and 80s, have been on thyroid meds for decades at times. And we start doing things. They've got to get off the thyroid medicine to continue healing. The health of their skin, it starts to reflect multiple colors. You quit seeing veins, and it starts to be rich and reflect light, and their eyes start to clear up. Their hair starts to grow. Their energy comes back. And when their libido comes back in their mid-80s, they just get giddy.
I think that is so amazing. You touched on a subject earlier about epigenetics that I want us to touch on. It is something that I heard a while ago. And the sperm and the egg. So many times people feel that the only contribution the male has to procreation is during the act and depositing the sperm. But recently I've been hearing that the sperm is responsible for the uteral lining and the sac that the baby lives in. Can you comment on that? Because I love the fact that it's not a once and done, and that the health and well-being of the father is what affects the child's epigenetics and its environment.
Okay, so I'm going to go way, way, way back in history.
Okay.
To address this subject.
Okay.
If we look at all cultures of ancient days, Jewish culture is really classic of this. A man was not allowed to seek a wife until he could prove he could support her. And then they committed for life. You think of what's gone on in our societies, the epitome of what you just said is test tube babies. You look at what's gone in our societies, this women's lib stuff has denigrated women's value and made them very vulnerable and used way too much. The sexual revolution has broken that bond where the father image is going to be there. When we look at ancient cultures, they all know the heritage, the lineage, the honor, the passing on of generations of wisdom and wealth and all that was primarily through the father. And if you look at families, and it doesn't matter your belief system, if you understand this concept, this is huge. If you take families that are of Christian origin, if the mother is the believer in the household, 25% of those people will do likewise. 25% of those children. If the father is a committed believer, 75% of those children will never depart from their faith. And you think about that, this influence of the father isn't just conception. I know plenty of fathers are playing with their children while they're growing inside mom's uterus. And they're interacting. One of my son-in-laws woke up my daughter in the middle of the night because he came home late and he wanted to interact, and he's talking to his baby, and he just forgets that his wife's asleep over there, and he wakes her up and is like, "What are you doing?" They've got studies of when children are read to and interacted with in utero, they're way ahead of the curve in learning and language skills and all these other social skills. You have so much more than just this union of two seeds.
Absolutely. And so you took the conversation in a different direction. And I want to be really clear that the patriarchy system that we developed was disempowering to men and to women. It broke the bond that we require both masculine and feminine, and that both matter. I was talking about the physical environment of conception and the growth of the fetus. But I love how you went into the social as well, because we have gone to a place where we have an epidemic of fathers walking away from families, and we have an epidemic of single mothers, which reduces economic impact and the burden. But in order for us to be whole and healthy in every area of our lives, we have to be balanced with the masculine and the feminine, with every aspect of our being. But can we revert back to what I was saying about the physics? Have you done any research on the epigenetics of how the sperm creates the environment that the fetus grows in?
Well, there's so much about the union of those two that most people don't realize. A woman's reproductive tract is more acidic in nature because of the flora that's there. A man's semen is more basic. The pH of those two together have about a 75% accuracy in determining the sex of the child, which sperm is going to get to the egg first. The acidic environment, 75% of the time, throws female children. A basic environment, 75% of the time, throws male children. So we have all these dynamics going on inside of there. I think it's the male sperm tend to swim faster, but they're weaker. And there's a layer around the egg called the acrosome, and it takes a whole bunch of sperm aggregating around the outside of that egg to break that acrosome down for one to get in. But it's the pH that really determines which one does. So that's really huge. And for people who want the perfect, like California couple, they just want two children, they want a boy and a girl, that's really important for them. For others, it's not as big of a thing, but you look at most families and people they want daughters and they want sons. And there's a very big difference between the two. I interact with little girls. I love kids. I didn't grow up around them at all, but I just love kids. And, this thing about a female, there's such a healthy thing when she's treated like a princess in an honest way, not where she's spoiled to death, but when she's cherished, she's nurtured, she's protected, she is escorted around, she spins around and her skirt flows out and she just looks like an angel. I mean, that's a God thing. It just is. Boys don't function that way. They just don't function that way. And you look at all of these different aspects that are there. A significant amount of that is from fathers, but from the very first, it is. You look at the genetic breakdown of things. To make the egg and to make the sperm, you have these genetic chains that people see them, all these helixes that you see. People don't realize this, but in nature, all the helixes that are built in nature, everything spins to the left, not to the right. Nothing has a biological activity if it spins to the right, only if it spins to the left. And they can't hardly make left spins in laboratories, but it's the way nature builds everything. So
Wow.
you have these chromosomes, they split. And oftentimes they'll split a couple of times to make the seeds. Well, each one of those splits has a completely different genetic expression. And when those two come together, those splits can be one of a multitude of combinations with, like, say if you have 4 variants in the egg and 4 variants in the sperm, it's a factorial thing, and it's like 100 different variants, something like that between those two, and all that's determined by pH and who knows what else to bring all that stuff together. So what's set in motion is in that. But the most interesting thing is the woman's health when she gets pregnant determines the health of 5 generations, her own and 4 generations after her. So you can really change genetic expression by getting women healthy before they get pregnant. Right now, I'm working with a couple who try to get pregnant for a long period of time. Nothing has worked at all. And I checked the wife out first, and I said, it's going to be about 4 months, and you're going to be ready to get pregnant. Husband's sicker than she was. They're both of foreign descent, and I believe he was born in a foreign country. And where he was born, he had all the disease issues that were endemic in that country, which he's carried his whole life. And when the couple gets together, he's given all those to her, but her constitution is higher and she has less of a degree than he does. She's going to be clean and ready. And I told her in like 4 months, at 2 months checkup, she's well on the track of doing that. And this is, I don't know how long they've been trying. It's probably over a decade. And, she just wants children. And women, that is what they're made for. And it's, in my own life, the only ones I've seen that really don't want children. There's something broken in their past. Because that's really what they're designed to. It's a fulfillment thing for a woman to want children. It's just normal. It's their nature. And she is so excited because she's worked with all these different people, done all these different things, and not seen any change. And we are seeing dramatic changes in so many different ways. Her first cycle was different than she's ever experienced. The bloating, all the headaches, all the other things, it just wasn't there. The flow was radically different. And she's just noticing all these things are just, it's starkly obvious that this guy's not jerking my chain. It's really obvious. My body's changing a whole bunch, and I can believe what he's saying because all these changes I've never experienced before. And her cycles are not an issue.
Okay, so you brought up a couple of things, and I want to make sure that we're not touching on anything that sounds and feels sexist, that we are talking science and biology. Because a woman's ability to be in her most feminine and create estrogen and be at her best requires a certain strength of foundation and safety. The
Absolutely.
only way that, so for that estrogen to come out and be flowing and a woman to be in her creation and her full essence, she needs to have safety and security and a place where she is free to be And if she's in an environment where her central nervous system is saying we're on high alert, we're not safe, things aren't good, it's going to shut down that reproductive part of her body.
And I can tell you physiologically how that happens. It's pretty simple. You just talked, you opened up the door, but you didn't say the word. I'll want to say the word. You're talking about abuse. That's one big aspect that does that. It's not the only one, but that is one aspect. And
that is definitely one, but it's also financial. It could be society. It could
right.
be work-life balance. It could be
Right.
lack of communication. There's a whole area of
Yeah.
things.
Okay.
But
So I'll change that. Abuse is one of those different aspects, but what you're talking about is stress
yes,
in general. And when we look at stress, there's every kind of stress that there is. There's chemical stresses, physical stresses, biomechanical stresses, relational stresses, financial stresses. Your body doesn't differentiate one to the other. They all add up. And once you hit your limit, the stress response goes on. That's primarily through the adrenal glands. Now, your adrenal glands, they pump out cortisol and adrenaline, and that does a whole bunch of different things. It's supposed to drop down your inflammatory levels. It jacks your blood sugar through the roof, and its adrenals are primarily the cause of diabetes. It's not the pancreas and insulin. It's the cortisol and adrenaline raising the blood sugars from melting your muscles, and the amino acids get converted into sugars in your liver. So that's one aspect that goes on. Your blood sugars go up through the roof, but your adrenals also produce pregnenolone and DHEA. Those are the precursors to all the sexual hormones. Pregnenolone and DHEA get converted first into progesterone. Progesterone converts to testosterone. Testosterone converts into estrogen. Both men and women, 50% of that conversion is in peripheral tissues, not the ovaries and the testicles. It's peripheral tissues. And women, before they start the cycle, it's peripheral tissues. After menopause, it's all peripheral tissues. Men, it's 50% of the time, all the time, no matter what. So when you get high stress situations, all the pregnenolone and DHEA get shunted over to make cortisol and adrenaline at different rates. A healthy person, it's maybe 10%, but we see a lot of people that are highly stressed out up to 90, sometimes 100%. So there's nothing left to build the sexual hormones. And when you don't build the sexual hormones, that's what a huge part of makes the expressions of masculinity and femininity. And it's interesting when you look at the attraction of the sexes, there's two factors that are absolutely at the top of the list for what makes the opposite sex attractive. Hygiene is way, way up there. And it's not a surprise. It's really not a surprise, because to really be affectionate, you need clean surfaces, not sticky ones. And, so that really makes a lot of sense. The other one is this thing that our society in America, this is an absolute reality, but we see this globally, is this transgender issue where people lose these issues. There's nothing that's more attractive to a male than true femininity. And that's not some glamour girl like a Marilyn Monroe with that one famous picture where the wind's blowing her skirt up. That's not what femininity is. That's a woman who's a lesbian, a woman who can express herself as a woman with that tender, sensitive, intuitive, nurturing side. It's that's to a male, that's the most attractive thing. And you look at a woman, true masculinity, not hyper masculinity, not abusive masculinity, but that stable as a rock issue. People Men don't even understand what testosterone is for. It's to give them emotional stability. It's to give them strength to go out and do work and provide. It are the estrogens in women and the testosterone in men controls our digestion, our absorption, every metabolic function of every cell in our body. It controls it. I was doing some studies on that a while ago for estrogen, trying to figure out what all these things are. And I finally ran across an article, research article that admits we know estrogen affects every cell in the body, but we only study the sexual tissues. Like, because it's the bias that pays for the research, and the bias primarily comes from the pharmaceutical industry, and they're trying to prove something to justify more use of pharmaceuticals. So the things that really matter to you and me, your listeners, and the people who need help, they're not being studied. And there's no access in the main lines of diagnostics for those people, because that's not how diagnostics were designed. They were designed to promote the use of pharmaceuticals.
And here we are, full circle, right back where we began. So now that we're back to full circle, and unlearning the crap is about personal empowerment through self-knowledge and self-healing. What do you tell people as they are navigating their own health or life issues? How do they start this process?
If you go to the landing page on my website, hello.healthfullyu.com, HEALTHFULLY, letter U.com, I've got a free ebook on lifestyle healing. It's all about epigenetics and simple things you can do to change your destiny. It changes your day, tomorrow, and throughout all generations. It's simple. It's about a 17-page download ebook, and that gives links to all kinds of other avenues also. So that's one of the simplest things some people can do. It's right there. You can.
Thank you for that resource.
Yeah, so that's a huge one. The relational health is really huge. Dietary health is really huge. And to talk about diet is such a long conversation, because we have, in both of our countries, we have this huge fueling of subsidizing toxic crops. About 72 or 3% in America is subsidized to make toxic crops. Almost all of that crop goes to making junk food that has no nutrition in it at all. It's just empty calories. And that's one of the biggest problems. Since it's subsidized, it sells for less than what real food does in a grocery store, and it destroys people's health. Our dietary lifestyle is absolutely huge. That lifestyle healing ebook I just talked about, it talks about some of those things. Water is another thing. We're about 73 to 5% water. 1% dehydration starts to give all the signs of dementia. It's mind-blowing.
Really?
Yeah, I remember being up in your country when I was young. We went camping up there, and we come into these lakes and say 99.8% pure, things along that line. And you go out in a canoe in a lake that's 100 feet, on a calm day, and you just look over, you can see the ground. That was just a mind blower to me, just a total mind blower. Clean water is absolutely paramount, and you can't get that through the city supply. You've got to do things to fix that. That's addressed in that same ebook. So we've got all of these things, and that's what people can do, is really take ownership of their diet. On top of that, it's really, really hard to find people you can work with. We work with some of the most debilitating things out there, and somebody asked, can you work with things that aren't that way? And I'm looking at the person, they've got long-term autoimmune issues. I can just see it just looking at their face. You know how to read those things, and you can see that, and it's like you think you don't have what you have, but it's so obvious. And they're picking at all these flaked out areas on their face and all that, trying to get those away so I don't see them. But I just glance. You train yourself to see what's there. There's not a lot of docs who take the view that I take. I know some of the biggest names in the industry. They have no clue as to what we do. We've had other docs send false patients to try and steal what we do, and it's all about what you know up here. It's all these inner workings and how to test those. And there's anybody that's doing lab tests doesn't have access to that. There's 4 different kinds of testing. There's lab testing. It's atrocious in its accuracy. The lab test for Lyme disease, 0 to 20% accurate if you take it within the first 1 to 2 weeks of infection. That's what the best Lyme lab in the world used to say. Now it just says our tests are not a diagnosis. You look at food intolerance testing, 2 to 3% accurate at best. You look at all these fancy things like the CDSA, which tells you what's going on in your gut. They're so inaccurate, we can't even use them clinically. Candida testing shows no clinical relevance. You can't use those. It's just down the line. They're all like that. And if you go into somebody who's using lab tests, all they can do is throw things at symptoms and guess first, and then throw things and come back in 6 weeks and we'll see what's going on. You got dark field microscopy. I was at a Lyme forum where one of the top researchers, Lyme disease, was running that forum. And I asked that question, and he goes, well, you can't define what's in a dark field microscope. You can see shapes going in, but you can't identify the species. You need a specific stain for every different microbe that you see in a slide. And there's no stain in a live blood. So you see a shape and you see this corkscrew. You don't know if that's Lyme disease, syphilis, or something benign. You have no idea. I go, okay.
Wow.
And it's like there's nothing left to discuss. There's a head pathologist in a research hospital. There's nothing left to discuss about that. I mean, he satisfied that question. There is also electrodiagnosis, which has a reasonable accuracy, but it can't determine the extent or the cause. And because it can't identify the cause, it can't direct the care of that cause to any accuracy. And we've seen numerous people who have had that type of system. They got sold on the system, but they're still sick and they want to continue that route. But we test them on what they're prescribed, and 80% of the time there's nothing that works. And a few that are left, at least 80% of they have doesn't work, and it's undoing their health. And the last system of testing is muscle testing. It's 95 to 97% accurate when it's done with a few caveats that are in there. No bias. Okay, you can't have your special thing that you put everybody in a box. You can't have any preconceived ideas. You got to be very proficient at it, and you have to be very, very honest and transparent with it. My testing, Mark Hyman's probably arguably the most famous functional medicine doc in the world. He recently did a podcast where he said that their extensive testing is 100 different tests. Mine's 4.5 times that.
Wow. We could go so deep into this conversation, and the amount of ways that we could talk about our health and our wellness. I've loved every second of this. I am so sad that we are out of time. Thank you, Dr. Brad, for your time and your expertise. I loved your perspective. And for those of you who are watching, don't forget to continue to challenge all of your thoughts so that you can achieve anything. We are here to unlearn the crap we've been taught. We are more powerful than we've ever been told, and your health and your wellness are in your hands. Until next time. Thank you for joining me on this episode of The Unlearning Curve. I hope you enjoyed it. If something landed for you today, make sure to follow, like, comment, and share, and check out all the other full interviews and other episodes of Unlearn the Crap and Level Up podcast, where you'll find deeper conversations, expert guests, and real stories from people just like you who are unlearning their crap and choosing clarity. Visit me at kathybaldwin.me and get all my free resources. Check out my coaching programs as well as my books. Until next time, keep showing up, keep unlearning, and keep leveling up because your soul is calling.